Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your greatest gift is also your greatest curse. Since childhood, you've been told that intelligence is a privilege, a tool that will make life easier, open doors, and bring success. You've been led to believe that the smarter you are, the better your life will be. But what if that's a lie? What if, instead of making life simpler, intelligence only makes it more complicated? What if, instead of happiness, it brings isolation? Arthur Schopenhauer believed that the more a person understands the world, the less they can enjoy it. He wrote, "A high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial, because when you see reality for what it truly is, the illusions, the manipulation, the fleeting nature of everything, you begin to disconnect. You start to see through the distractions that others find comfort in. The conversations that bring people joy feel repetitive. The ambitions that drive society seem meaningless. And slowly you start to feel like an outsider in a world that once felt familiar." Most people go through life without questioning it. They find happiness in routine, in social validation, in the pursuit of pleasure. But intelligence is the enemy of ignorance. And ignorance, for all its flaws, is a kind of bliss. The less you analyze, the easier it is to enjoy. But when you are constantly dissecting everything, relationships, emotions, purpose, the simplicity of life fades away. A child sees a magic trick and is amazed. They believe in the illusion, and in that moment, they experience wonder. But an intelligent mind, it sees the strings, the deception, the mechanics behind the trick, and just like that, the magic is gone. The same principle applies to life itself. The more you know, the harder it is to be amazed. The more you see, the harder it is to care. At first, this awareness feels like power. You feel like you've unlocked something others haven't. But then, the weight of it begins to sink in. You start noticing things you wish you didn't. How temporary happiness is. How fragile relationships can be. How much of life is dictated by forces beyond our control. And suddenly, what once felt like a gift begins to feel like a burden. The question is, does intelligence really make life better? Or does it simply make it harder to ignore the things that others never have to think about? Most people go through life accepting things as they are. They laugh at jokes without questioning them. They find happiness in simple pleasures. They wake up, go to work, talk about the weather, and repeat the cycle without ever asking why. To them, this is life. It doesn't need to be dissected, analyzed, or understood. It just needs to be lived. But intelligence doesn't allow that. The smarter you are, the harder it is to just exist without questioning everything. The deeper your awareness, the harder it is to ignore the contradictions, the illusions, the artificial structures that shape the world. What seems normal to others starts to feel scripted, almost like a play where everyone is following an invisible script, unaware that they're acting. Think about the things people chase: money, status, validation. To the average person, these things seem meaningful, worth pursuing. But an intelligent mind sees them for what they really are: distractions, temporary satisfactions that never last. You work for years to afford luxury, only to realize that material things don't fulfill you. You seek approval from society, only to realize that no amount of validation can give you real confidence. You chase pleasure, only to realize that the pursuit itself makes you restless. Schopenhauer saw this illusion clearly. He believed that most people live not for themselves, but for the expectations of others. He wrote, "We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves in order to be like other people. But for the intelligent mind, pretending is impossible." The more you understand how meaningless certain social constructs are, the harder it is to participate in them. You see through the small talk, the forced smiles, the need to impress people who don't really care, and slowly you start pulling away. At first it feels like freedom. You stop playing the game. You stop pretending to care about things that don't matter. You think, "I see things for what they really are, and that makes me different." But then, the isolation begins. You no longer fit in with those who still believe in the illusion, but at the same time, you can't change the way the world works, and so you find yourself caught between two realities, too aware to live like everyone else, but too powerless to change anything. This is the weight of awareness. It is the realization that while intelligence may set you apart, it does not necessarily set you free. Because the more you see, the harder it becomes to look away. At first, intelligence feels like an advantage. You see things others don't. You understand what drives people, what motivates them, what makes the world function the way it does. You start recognizing patterns, predicting behaviors, understanding the hidden rules of social life. It makes you feel powerful, like you have access to knowledge that most people will never grasp. But then something changes. The more you see, the less you relate. Conversations that used to feel natural now feel artificial. The jokes people tell don't make you laugh the way they used to. The things that excite others don't excite you anymore. You try to engage, to play along, but there's a disconnect, a growing distance between you and the world around you, and eventually you stop trying. Schopenhauer believed that true intelligence often leads to solitude, not because intelligent people hate others, but because they struggle to find those who think the same way. He wrote, "Almost all of our sorrows spring out of our relations with other people. The more deeply you think, the harder it becomes to find people who challenge you, who inspire you, who make you feel understood. So instead of forcing shallow connections, you retreat into yourself. At first, solitude feels like a choice. You enjoy your own company, diving into books, ideas, and personal projects. You stop needing social validation. You tell yourself, "I'm better off alone than surrounded by people I can't relate to." But over time, that solitude starts to feel less like freedom and more like isolation. You begin to wonder, is it that I don't want to connect with others, or that I no longer know how? History is full of brilliant minds who walked this path. Nikola Tesla lived almost entirely alone, more fascinated by electricity than human interaction. Isaac Newton, one of the greatest thinkers of all time, was notoriously antisocial. Schopenhauer himself spent most of his life in isolation, convinced that people were incapable of deep thought. These men achieved greatness, but at what cost? Because here's the paradox. The more intelligent you are, the more you crave depth. And the more you crave depth, the harder it becomes to connect with people who are satisfied with the surface. So you isolate yourself, not out of arrogance, not because you think you're better than others, but because it's exhausting to exist in a world that doesn't think the way you do. And yet deep down, there's still a part of you that longs to be understood. The question is, can a mind that sees too much ever truly feel at home in this world? A powerful mind is a double-edged sword. It allows you to break things down, analyze, and understand complexities that others overlook. But when left unchecked, that same intelligence turns against you. Your mind, once a tool for clarity, becomes a labyrinth of endless thought, one where every path leads to more questions, more doubts, more uncertainty. Schopenhauer believed that intelligence is not just a gift, but a burden. He saw the human mind as something that, when given too much freedom, destroys itself. He wrote, "The greatest of follies is to sacrifice health for any other kind of happiness." And yet, that is exactly what an overactive mind does. It sacrifices inner peace for the endless pursuit of understanding. At first, overthinking feels like control. You analyze every situation, every decision, every word spoken to you. You dissect relationships, looking for hidden meanings. You replay past mistakes, wondering what you could have done differently. You try to predict the future, as if knowledge alone can protect you from uncertainty. But instead of giving you control, overthinking traps you. Instead of making decisions, you second-guess yourself into paralysis. Instead of finding peace, you spiral deeper into anxiety. Instead of enjoying the moment, you deconstruct it until all that's left is its flaws. Take happiness, for example. Most people feel joy without needing to understand why. But an intelligent mind questions its own happiness. Am I really happy, or just distracting myself? Is this moment real, or just another illusion? And just like that, happiness fades. Not because it wasn't there, but because you thought too much about it. Schopenhauer argued that life is filled with suffering, and intelligence only amplifies it. Because the more you think, the more you notice the imperfections, the things that don't make sense, the emotions that contradict themselves, the parts of life that will never have clear answers. And the more you search for those answers, the further you drift from the simplicity of just being. This is the trap of overthinking. You assume that if you analyze enough, you'll find clarity. But in reality, clarity is not something you think your way into. It's something you allow yourself to feel. And so the question remains, is intelligence truly an advantage? Or is it just another form of self-destruction? At some point, every intelligent person comes to a realization. Understanding the world does not mean you can change it. People assume that intelligence gives them power, that if they just learn enough, analyze enough, or think deeply enough, they can gain control over life. They believe that knowledge is a weapon, something they can use to shape their destiny, to avoid mistakes, to navigate human relationships with precision. But Schopenhauer saw through this illusion. He believed that intelligence does not grant control. It only reveals how little control we truly have. A smart person quickly learns that most things in life are beyond their influence. You cannot control how others perceive you. You cannot force people to change. You cannot rewrite the past, no matter how much you analyze it. And yet, the mind refuses to accept this truth. Instead, it overcompensates, overthinking, overanalyzing, trying to find meaning in things that are inherently chaotic. This is why intelligent people often struggle with frustration. They see how irrational people can be, how systems are broken, how society rewards manipulation over honesty. They recognize patterns in human behavior and think, if only people saw what I see, the world would be different. But it never is. The more you understand, the more powerless you feel. History is filled with great minds who fell into this trap. Friedrich Nietzsche saw how morality was shaped by power and manipulation, but he couldn't change it. Arthur Schopenhauer understood the nature of suffering but remained trapped in his own discontent. Even Leonardo da Vinci, arguably one of the greatest minds in history, died frustrated with the world, convinced that people were incapable of appreciating true knowledge. So what happens when you realize that intelligence does not equal control? Some people become bitter, resentful of a world that refuses to change. Others retreat into isolation, choosing to live in their own minds rather than engage with a reality that disappoints them. And some try to escape through distractions, through indulgence, through anything that numbs the pain of knowing too much. But there is another path. Schopenhauer believed that the only real way to handle the burden of intelligence was through detachment, to stop trying to control the uncontrollable. He argued that the key to peace is not in mastering life, but in surrendering to it. The question is, can a mind that craves control ever truly learn to let go? If intelligence isolates, if overthinking destroys happiness, if awareness only leads to frustration, then what is the solution? Is the only escape to reject intelligence? To suppress thought? To dull the mind? To force oneself into ignorance? Schopenhauer had a different answer. He believed that intelligence itself is not the problem. Attachment is. The more you attach yourself to control, to meaning, to the need for answers, the more you suffer. The true curse of intelligence is not knowledge itself, but the refusal to accept that some things in life will never be understood, predicted, or changed. Most people spend their lives fighting against uncertainty, overthinking their past, trying to control their future, resisting the reality of impermanence. But Schopenhauer, influenced by Eastern philosophy, argued that peace comes not from mastering life, but from surrendering to it. He believed that true wisdom is knowing when to stop seeking, when to let go, when to allow things to simply be. Think of a river. The more you try to grasp the water, the faster it slips through your fingers. But if you let your hands relax, the water flows naturally around you. Intelligence works the same way. The more you fight against the weight of knowledge, the heavier it becomes. But if you stop resisting, stop trying to force meaning where there is none, suddenly the burden becomes lighter. This is why some of the wisest individuals in history were also the most peaceful. Lao Tzu, the Buddha, even Schopenhauer in his later years, they all came to the same conclusion. The secret to happiness is not thinking more, it is thinking less. Not in the sense of rejecting intelligence, but in learning when to quiet the mind, when to step back, when to simply experience rather than analyze. This doesn't mean abandoning thought. It doesn't mean rejecting curiosity or suppressing intelligence. It means learning to live with it. It means understanding that the mind is a tool, not a master. That knowledge is valuable, but it is not everything. That some questions will never be answered, and that's okay. So the real question is not, is intelligence a curse, but can an intelligent mind learn to stop fighting itself? Because maybe the true measure of wisdom is not how much we know, but how well we live with what we don't.